I think that I shall never see a poem lovely as a tree whose hungry mouth is pressed against earth's sweet flowing breast, a tree that looks at God all day and lifts leafy arms to pray, a tree that may in summer wear a nest of robins in her hair, upon whose bosom snow has lain, who intimately lives with rain. A poem is made by fools like me, but only God can make a tree. Oh, well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Okay, English Lit class, who wrote that poem? Who wrote that? Joyce Kilmer. Joyce Kilmer. I am embarrassed that I did not know about Joyce Kilmer, much less his poem Trees, until I went to my first appointment as a pastor in Western North Carolina. I went there to serve two small churches in the mountains, and one of the churches was at the base of Cold Mountain. That first autumn, someone in the church suggested that we have a church outing to go out to the Joyce Kilmer National Forest that's at the westernmost part of the state. I did not even know that was in North Carolina growing up. Beautiful big trees. It was the peak of autumn color. So one crisp October morning, about a dozen of us met in the church parking lot to carpool together and drive about 2 hours out to the park, hike, drive back. As people got into cars, there was one woman left, and someone said, "Why don't you ride with the pastor?" In my first 2 months of Sundays there, this was a woman I had observed as never smiling. Never had a kind word to say. It wasn't that she was rude. It's just she had no affect at all. And I thought, this is going to be a long day. After about 10 minutes of silence in the car, I couldn't take it anymore. I just started asking questions. "So have you lived here long?" "Yes." "Do you have family?" "I do." "Do you have any children?" After a few moments, she said, "My oldest son died when he was 13. I said, I'm so sorry. Had he been ill?" "No, he went hunting with his best friend, and he got shot and he died. The friend said it was an accident, but I never really believed his story, and he never had anything done to him, and I've been angry about it, and I guess you could say I've been angry with God." Now a long silence. And then she had a question for me. "How old are you?" I thought, here we go. She thinks I'm too green to even have this conversation. I said, "I'm 25. She said, "I thought that's about how old you are. That's the age my son would have been." I thought of that story, and I will come back to it in a few minutes. But I was reminded of it when I thought about the Joyce Kilmer poem. And I start the sermon today with that poem because of an inspiration I received back during my study break in July. I was out at our condo in Colorado. One morning I had books and papers spread across our dining table working on other sermons and other potential series, and no inspiration was coming. So I looked up at a picture that's on the wall above our dining table. This is it. And I just sort of got lost in that picture that in many ways looks like territory not far from our condo, looking at the golden aspens and I started daydreaming, and inspiration started to come. Not for the work at hand, mind you, but for something. I don't know why God does that to me. I seldom get inspiration for what I need in the moment. Instead, it'll be thoughts that have nothing to do with it. But I went with it. I pushed all the books aside. I pulled out a legal pad, and I started writing. When I got back to Indianapolis, I sat down with Pastor Indy to talk about future sermons, and I said, now, I've got this idea for October that we could do a series we might call The Faith of Trees. And she looked at me much like you're looking at me right now. When I explained it to her, she said, I can go with that. So for these 3 Sundays, we're going to take metaphors from the changing life of trees and think about them in a spiritual way. And we start today right where nature is, with the beginning of the change of colors. Did you see the cover of the Indy Star today? This is it. Change is in the air, the cover of the newspaper with the best places to go to see the tree color in Indiana. You know, whether you're driving around Indiana, whether you go up to Michigan, or down to the Great Smokies, or up to Vermont, or out to the golden aspens of Colorado, it's like over this next month, the world explodes with color. And you probably remember from your high school biology class that this is the time of year we get to see the true color of a tree. The true color of a tree is not green. Green comes from chlorophyll, the green pigment that transforms light and water into the food source of trees. So in summertime, when the trees have all the food they need and life is good, they're all green. But it's now that we see the true color of a tree. So when you're enjoying the beauty of October, then remind yourself that all of this glory means the trees are under stress. The chlorophyll is receding. Their food source is reducing. And they show us that stress reveals true colors. Now there's a connection point, isn't it? Stress usually reveals the true colors in our soul. When it's summertime in the soul and life is pleasant, it's easy to have the aspirations of behavior that we all want to show all the time. But it's when we're under stress that the true colors come out. Sometimes it's those exact aspirations. We behave like we want to. But other times it may be different behaviors. But deep down, what trees show us is that stress can reveal beauty. So how do we have the faith of trees? Let's talk about a character in the Old Testament named Joseph. Joseph was the youngest of 12 sons born to their father Jacob, who was renamed Israel. The 12 sons became the 12 tribes of Israel, largely in part because of Joseph. When he was a boy, he had a dream that one day all of his brothers would bow down to him, that he was destined to do something great for his family. But the brothers resented that dream. They sold him to slave traders who took Joseph down to Egypt, where he was made a servant in the home of a man named Potiphar, an Egyptian official. But we are told as we read this story in Genesis, the Lord was with Joseph. So he applied himself. He prospered in his management of the home. In fact, Potiphar decided to put Joseph in charge of everything in his home until Potiphar's wife began to seduce Joseph. And Joseph knew that that would be dishonorable to her and to himself, and most importantly, to God. So when he declined her advances, she accused him of rape, and Potiphar had him thrown in prison. But the Lord was with Joseph. He turned his attention to other inmates and encouraging them and helping them. And the captain of the guard noticed the improved spirit of the prisoners. So the guard put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners. One day, 2 new prisoners arrived who had been officials in the court of Pharaoh. They were disturbed by a dream that they had, and Joseph helped them. And when one of those officials was restored to his previous position, he forgot about Joseph, and Joseph remained in prison another 2 years. But the Lord was with Joseph. Then one day when Pharaoh had a dream no one could interpret, that's when the servant remembered Joseph and told Pharaoh, who brought Joseph out of prison. And Joseph interpreted Pharaoh's dream. And Pharaoh released him and made him an official in his court. And Joseph was so successful in everything he did. Why? We ought to be able to say it together now. Because the Lord was with Joseph. And eventually he becomes second in command, the prince of Egypt. And then there's a famine back in the land of his biological family. And the father Israel sends the 11 brothers, 10, keeping one of the brothers at home so that they could go down to Egypt and buy food. They heard things down there were prosperous, even though there was a famine. They had no idea it's because of Joseph. But when the brothers get there and realize in order to do trade with this other nation, we're going to have to go before the one person with the authority to do that, and it would be Joseph. When they discovered who it was, they were shattered. They knew that their brother would now get revenge for what he did to them. But because Joseph all along the way knew that the Lord was with him, he was now able to see the fulfillment of his dream. He couldn't take revenge. In fact, he makes this powerful statement to the brothers, one of the more powerful in the Bible. Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Joseph saw the power of God to take stress after stress after stress and bring beauty out of it. 2 observations I would make about this story for us. One is this: crisis may take away options, but it can't take away our ability to choose. Joseph had everything in his life taken away. All of his possessions, his family, his security, but what he found in prison is the one thing that could not be removed from him is how he chose to face those times. The French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, during World War II, was a prisoner of war to the Nazis. In 1944, he wrote an essay called The Republic of Silence, in which he said, "Never were we freer than under German occupation." Now, how do you make sense of that? That until he was in a place with all other freedoms taken away, could he realize the most powerful freedom that could not be removed from him? The ability to choose. He said in that same essay, freedom is what you do with what's been done to you. Joseph could have chosen to be bitter about everything that happened in his life. He could have chosen to be vindictive, creating a list of people he was going to get even with, especially as his power grew. But he chose not to go down that path. He chose to forgive and do things that were good, believing God would bring good out of all of it. Another observation about this story: believing God will bring us to a beautiful outcome helps us hang on to God when things are ugly. Joseph had a dream that he would not let go of. And as he held on to that dream and believed that it was true, then during the ugly times, he would keep a hold of that until the beauty shone through. You know, sometimes when you read the Bible, you need to read it not only from the perspective of the people in the story, but the people who told the story. The Bible, for hundreds and hundreds of years, was passed on by word of mouth before it was ever written down. These stories were told one generation to the next, and you wonder why. Why these stories? What was so important about them that they kept telling it and telling it and telling it again, especially Joseph? That they knew that future generations were going to face their own hard times, their own ugly moments. And they would need a narrative that kept them going, believing that God would work through it. You know, we live in a day and time when we don't know what to believe about truth anymore. That distortions and sometimes outright lies get promoted. And the belief is if you just keep telling it over and over and over again, it will become truth. And you know what? It's not a bad idea. It all depends on the story you tell. It all depends on the story you tell. And if you keep telling yourself that the chance to see beauty in the future is not when you return evil for evil, but when you return evil for good, and you keep saying it again and again and again, then the story becomes real inside of you. So back to my outing at the Joyce Kilmer National Forest. We arrived, we took a beautiful walk for several hours, then rode back. I waited about 30 minutes before I said to this woman, I want to thank you for telling me about your son. You showed a lot of trust in me by sharing that. I said, I can't imagine what it would be like to be in your shoes. I can't imagine the pain of losing a child. I said, I can't imagine being the friend of your son. You said that your son loved being with his friend, that as far as you knew, the friend had no reason whatsoever to harm your son. And he was just 13 years old. I imagine he had no idea how to respond. And all these years, he's had to live with the reality of killing his best friend. I can't imagine that. I said, but what I can imagine is what God feels, because God knows what it's like to lose a son. The cross says to me that God understands the kind of pain you've been through, and that what it means is God meets us in those places to give us strength and encouragement to keep going. She didn't say anything, but I could tell she was thinking. So I said, if your son were here right now, I wonder what he would say to you. She didn't hesitate. She said, oh, I know what he would say. Mom, it's time to move on. That Sunday, someone came up to me and said that he had spoken to her. He asked about the trip out to the National Forest, and he said, I understand you rode with the new pastor. What was that like? She said, I rode out there with a kid, and I came back with my pastor. That's not about me, She did the hard work. She opened up her life to a new possibility, and that's not easy to do. And over my remaining time in that church, I saw her smile more and more. I saw her laughing. I saw her engaging in community with fullness of life. It's an amazing thing what can happen when you go look at trees. In your bulletin this morning, you hopefully received a leaf in your bulletin. Do you have a leaf? Everybody have a leaf? Yeah, I can see them. I want you to hold on to this leaf and put it somewhere you'll see it regularly, but pick a particular place where you tend to experience your greatest stress. Now, I know that's risky because if you stick it on the refrigerator and other members of your family have heard this sermon, they may wonder. You might put it on your car dashboard. You might put it at work someplace. Where do you experience stress? And I want you to think about the way you behave that you wish could be different. When you say, when I'm under stress, I always do this. What is this? And I want you to write the opposite word on there. The opposite word might be patience. I am a person of patience. That's my true color. God gives me strength to live that way. Maybe the word you would write on here is understanding. I can be less reactive to the people around me. I can pause and be more understanding. That's my true color. Maybe your word is courage. I don't have to hide every time things get tense. I don't have to stuff down my feelings. I can share what's inside of me with love. I can have hard conversations. Maybe it's courage. That's my true color. Put your leaf somewhere that will not only help you remember that God is able to bring beautiful things out of stress, but God is able to bring out of you a true color that makes our world beautiful. And our world needs people living out of their true color. On this World Communion Sunday, we are reminded of how much our whole world needs to live out of beauty from the stress that we're going through, and how God gives us the strength to do that. Yes, we're all broken, but God meets us in our brokenness to grant us forgiveness, and there's nothing more beautiful than that. Amen.